You're listening to Gone Mobile, your input and output for all things .NET MAUI and mobile.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another Gone Mobile. Allan, is it Halloween? I've been reading the show notes, the episode title.
I came up with a good title, didn't I? It's pretty good.
Oh, it reminds me of watching, there was a cartoon version of Tales from the Crypt Keeper.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
But it was always the late night show as a kid that I liked because that guy was crazy and he had the most hilarious voice.
Yeah, exactly. Classic.
I don't remember the show at all. Oh, wow. That's a blast from the past.
So Tales from the Crypt is the title of the episode. What does that mean? What are we talking about?
So, well, we've probably both seen our fair share of interesting stuff. That's a nice way of putting it, right? This is a bit of a spicy topic, but I said I would be nice. I said I would be nice.
Mobile tends to be because it's a constrained computing environment, right? So it's less constrained than it was maybe, but that doesn't mean that, we're not still using the increased power and everything at all in the other places. So people tend to do some things sometimes in their app that aren't best practices.
Yes.
And so we want to help people today. We want to help them understand what's not a good idea and maybe share some fun examples in a jovial manner that we've seen.
Okay. John's being really nice about it, but I also do consulting, right? And I've kind of Maui's been a niche point in Xamarin in general. So John will be nice about it, but I think I've seen more.
You've probably seen
stupid stuff. There's my spicy
battle. Yeah.
And the thing is that it's like, if you just stopped and thought about what you're doing sometimes, you wouldn't point the finger. Always look at yourself first. Always look at your code first and then branch out. If you always assume it's the vendor or this third party stuff that you're bringing in, that's the problem.
One thing that I like to say too is if you're not finding a bunch of other people in the same boat as you with a particular problem, that's kind of indicative too of that maybe it's not, everybody, it's not the thing. It's maybe your stuff. That's not always the case. I mean, people hit unique situations and unique bugs and stuff that are not, their own making. But there's enough times where it's like, my startup performance is bad. That must be something wrong with Maui. Well,
that's a good one. I think we've covered it in the past where I've seen like an Android app that took 30 seconds to get going. Yeah. And it sat on a black screen. I don't know how Android didn't just kill it, but it didn't. The app kept running. It would spin up its 30 services or 300 services with like AutoMapper, and which I assume is doing a whole whack of, I know it's doing a whole whack of reflection and 30 seconds. It was an older Android tablet, but 30 seconds.
Well, and that's, kind of an interesting point too, where I know I've seen cases too where we'll have a report that's like, this thing is taking like, that's a dramatic example, right? 30 seconds. Like, yeah, that's okay. But there's other times where you might see someone like, hey, this thing is, taking several seconds and we want it to be faster. And, by the way, we're testing on a, Galaxy S2. Right. And so, and for reference, that's a really old device.
Get blood out of the stone.
Yeah. So you got to kind of temper expectations a bit on the environment you're running on, right? If it's a slow Android device, it's going to take longer no matter what. So like in that example, 30 seconds maybe is the worst case because it was a slow device, but yeah, still something's amiss there. We're not seeing everybody's complaining about, my app takes 30 seconds to load. So probably you want to look at your own code in that case.
Always start there. Always start at your own code. It doesn't matter. You can't, you should never assume third party. And if you are, using third party, try it out first. Like POC it outside of your app before you bring it into your app, and then you assume that the component's done something wrong, right?
And I think, as a good like steward to the community, if you run into something where you're pretty convinced that it's some, underlying framework or third party thing, like it's kind of on you to do your extra due diligence to kind of prove out that yes, that's actually the case, right? So that's another thing that you can see often, and I'm sure you get bug reports like that too in Shiny stuff, where you're like, maybe there's something there, but you're not helping me understand, how you're hitting this particular case, and providing a nice little repro that doesn't have all of your code in it, but also has enough of it that is actually showing, the real case that you're running. Like that's something I see a lot, where we'll ask for someone to make a reproduction, and to their credit, they go and do it, and it's, they try it. And it's not always easy to understand the parts that you're leaving out, and how they play a role. But often enough, it's like, yeah, you kind of gave us a reproduction, and then, you're saying, well, it doesn't really show the same as in your real app. Well, then it's not really
it's
a
not
reproduction.
Really a reproduction, right?
Yeah.
You have to show the issues so that you know what you're working with.
Yeah, and that can be hard, but like that's kind of the bar to getting something fixed at that point, right? If you're kind of saying, well, it's not me, it's you, you got to help understand, what the you part is that needs fixing, and provide the example.
Not what psychiatrists spend all the time figuring out what's wrong with you, but you gotta let them figure it out. You gotta let them know.
So you've seen some things. What kind of do you have some you want to share?
A tale from the crypt.
Yes.
It's funny. The ones that I always see, and I've seen this a lot, and I know you've seen this too, and people do it because they think it's engineering. It saves them lines of code. But sometimes the thing that you're engineering, I guess I don't want to call it over-engineering, because this one isn't really over-engineering, but it is, it's a shortcut to getting done. So I tend to see a lot of things like assembly scanning, right? So back in the old days in ASP.NET, we used to have like an iPlugin. You'd go ripping through all the DLLs to find the iPlugin interface. You'd load up that DLL. You'd pull stuff out of it. We still can do that on a server that's wired for high processing. You can get away with that. So what? Your app takes a few seconds to start.
Right. That's worth it, right? The cost is worth the value you get from it there.
But And I see this a lot when you get developers that come over from the web and server world. They're just like, here, we'll do the same thing here. We got to register all these screens. And it's like, well, no, because that takes some time, right? In an app that you want to start in like a second, if you start doing that stuff right out of the gate, it's going to pause the starting of the app, right? Usually what I tell people is if you got to do anything complicated like that, have like a startup page. Do it asynchronously and let it load. But generally what it is they'll do this assembly scanning one for like view models.
Right.
Maybe some, iPlugin, they might go hunting for it. And then they put it into their dependency injection container and they're like, well, look at all the lines of code we saved. Well, two problems just happened. One is you scanned, whether you know it or not, hundreds of DLLs. Even if you filtered it with like where clauses and link doesn't care. It's not like SQL Server. It's like, here's all of it. Go through the predicate. Right?
Yeah. Well, and so that's, I think you kind of touched on it. But one interesting thing that can happen, right, is depending how stuff compiles down. Like, I don't know if you do a type of, whatever random type, is in your main assembly where all your other things are that you're scanning for. I'm not sure either way if at some point some of those things can kind of get jammed together, like in an AOT context or something like that, where you're actually
potentially.
Yeah. So there's like that side of it to watch out for, right? You don't really know how that kind of compiles down to the particular platform, if it's JITted, if it's AOT, if it's interpreted, all these things. So like
they should
all
work.
be. Yeah, no, the types will work. I just mean like you're scanning an entire assembly for all of its types, and then you're filtering down over it, right? Like, and that gets, it's just not the fastest thing to do.
Well, and the thing is that if you look at all of the assemblies that actually do go in to a mobile app, right? If you really look at the BCL, and there is a lot. Like, it's several hundred libraries.
So going in like the app domain and getting all the assemblies and scanning through all of them, yeah, first of all, like that's just like the worst way you could do it. But even if you're still kind of scoping to like one or two of the assemblies that have them,
But
You're
then
still
there might
looping
be
through all the types.
several hundred types
Yeah.
in each one of those assemblies. So it's like a big query, and it's like an N+1 that you used to be really bad in SQL or lazy loading with like Entity Framework. It's not good. It's a hit.
What we used to do in Forms was, because that was a hit, right? And actually, I think you see this extending into like when if you ever wrote a source generator too, right? It's you'll start to see the use more of like, if you really want to do the scanning thing, which you shouldn't, but like if you really wanted to do it and you didn't want it to be the worst, performance, you can always do global like assembly level attributes, right? So that's what we did in Forms. Eventually, where if you wanted to declare like your service and your implementations of those, you had assembly level attributes that kind of pointed like, okay, for this service type, here's the implementation type, right? And so to go in and scan the assembly for just the assembly level attributes is much faster than going and walking through all the types in an assembly.
Yep.
So that's one avenue. If you're sold on like, no, I can't write that extra line of code to like register the service for the thing that I want to get later, I guess you could do that, but you're still writing a line of code then too.
Well, that's the funny thing. We missed this. So I was getting to this one point, is that by scanning all those assemblies for view models, you're not necessarily linker safe anymore, because it won't see that view model is being touched. At least when you had assembly level attributes, the compiler could see the type. Okay, the type is being referenced. I'm not going to touch it. I don't know how it's being used. I don't care, but I can see it's being touched externally.
Right.
So leave it alone.
Yeah.
But when you're doing an assembly scan, it's like, it doesn't know better. It's already removed it because it couldn't see it in the active path.
Right.
And
and
so there it goes.
And even like if you've got if you wanted to do the assembly level attribute, like at the same time, does that really save you much over writing the, services dot add, transient or singleton or whatever you're doing?
Yeah, it does save some cycles in terms of coding, because there can be, I'm working in projects that have like several hundred view models. That's a lot of registration code, but you can also do source generators.
Yes.
Right. Source generators are beautiful, and yeah, they're complicated to write. They're complicated to unit test, but once you figure it out, it's like a tool in your belt. Well, and you only pay that cost at the beginning.
I was going to say, if you screw something up in terms of performance, it's at compile time, not at runtime, right?
Exactly. And it's done. You'll notice it real quick, because you'll be like, man, my compilers are slow. We've seen that, right? Where when we started to do source generators, they're just like, here, go do everything. Go scan everything. Go run it.
Yeah.
We weren't doing it right because nobody could figure out how to use them. The documentation was pretty garbage at the beginning. So we just thought, hey, just go scan everything there and generate it. Well, it turns out you didn't need to do that. That's why they've kind of forced us into these incremental generators, which is just the underlying source generators doing it properly. It's weird.
I wonder if anyone's made a source generator that's like a little bit more generic in terms of like we're talking about, like, oh, I know every view model implements this interface or base class. I just want to go add those and register them.
Kind of. There is a plugin-ish library called Source Generator Kit that I found.
Okay.
I am using it. So it has like a couple of the syntax receivers. So if you have syntax receivers, which generally is what you have, just based on what you just described, right? Find me all of classes marked with this attribute. Find me all classes marked with this interface, etc. Yep. So it has a whole bunch of these syntax receivers.
Ooh, that's
handy. And then it even has an aggregate, right? So you can say, I want a couple of syntax receivers on this. And it'll say, okay, well, here's syntax receiver 1, here's syntax receiver 2, and it runs them both, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, it would all, yeah, it would
I
be
just
neat.
do 2 source generators, but some people might just want one. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm already thinking, down the road of like, well, yeah, maybe there is something here to like make some generic pre-built source generator. I don't know.
It's hard. Source generators are they're a bit of an art form still. They're still really complicated.
And that's why I say, like, it's easy to say don't do it this way and consider the other way. But like you said, writing a source generator is hard. So it's maybe not the most approachable solution to somebody who's not familiar with the area.
But once you figure it out, it can really, if you're trying to save lines, right? Because scanning all assemblies isn't, again, I'm not saying over engineering, but it's pretty borderline, right?
Mm-hmm.
it's an unnecessary thing to save lines of code. Maybe it's worth investing that time for source generators, because once you start using them, you can use them in a lot of scenarios. And instead of paying this runtime or even run during performance costs, it's done all of it for you, right?
Yeah.
So that's a way to get out of the scanning. It's to just let it scan at run or at build time instead of runtime.
Yeah, exactly.
That's ways to get out of it. So don't be stupid. Don't scan all these things.
So that's one
That's
thing.
Tale from the Crypt.
That's one tale that we've seen. What's another one?
I know this one. We've all seen this one. I've seen a company where they loaded up the most massive JSON file from the startup synchronously. And they would be like, hey, iOS is crashing off the beginning because it was taking longer.
Ooh.
I think it's that 17 seconds or whatever that you get.
Yeah, because the operating system will say like, nope, you can't take that long.
17 seconds.
Which is
or it would memory panic.
Pretty generous to begin with, 17 seconds. Like if I'm a user of your app and it doesn't start within 5, I'm already annoyed.
Yeah. Well, and again, if you got to do those things like with assets, just go to like everybody thinks that you have to do it when the app is starting. That's true, but you have the option to route to a starting page. So route to a startup page
and show some
no
progress.
Longer a splash screen.
Yeah.
That's in MAUI. You can do your large file loading, which let me explain why this large file loading was there. Like it was about 200, 300 megs.
Wow.
Okay. JSON file.
That's
big textual.
Using, well, I mean, yeah, I have other questions.
Yeah, well, hang on. So 300 megs, a 300 meg file, let's be honest, if that was all loaded, it's not really the end of the world. Like we might do API calls that can pull in, several hundred kilobytes. That's not really truly a problem. But taking that file and loading it into memory, one, it is going to take some time. At the ass end of it, it's not going to be the worst thing in the world. That's not a dangerous cache size. What is dangerous though, is if you're doing we have options to stream JSON results, right? So you can do all the JSON allocation, but get it right over to the object that you really need. But back then that didn't exist, man. It was like, take all of this, allocate absolutely every single thing you need, and then turn it into those objects, right? So the allocations on top of that 300 meg file turned it into like a 600 meg.
Right.
And then your virtual memory was like, oh my God, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm going to buffer you because it wants to scale the memory. It doesn't know how to do it now. You've chosen violence.
Well,
right?
that was kind of what I was thinking too. I'm like, well, 300 megs, fine. There's a file there, but how do you even load it with, you need to be careful about how you would load it and not just like, here's the whole thing in memory.
And that's what would happen. It would take so long. It'd either go into memory panic or it would take too long and it would crash. And the target, instead of looking at it and commenting out that one line, this customer chose violence times 2 and decided to blame Xamarin. Oh, Xamarin's slow. It's the mono runtime, etc. Just comment out that line.
Yeah, I mean, JSON files are a thing. Like, and I can't even imagine having that big of a JSON file. But one thing that I was a little bit more imaginable when I saw it, although like same problem, was I've seen in the past somebody trying to do the same with like video files. It's like they had, they shipped the app with like a MP4 or something in the bundle, and then they wanted to go and copy it somewhere so they could do something.
They could read it.
Yeah, but
because normally when you're touching embedded resource, you got to pull them out, right?
And maybe it was an embedded resource like in the .NET assembly app, because my first thought is like, well, if you had it in the right spot in like the native app, like you can just read it from there anyway. Like, so, but that one was kind of the same thing. It's like, well, you're doing this on app startup, like that's not going to be fast. Like it's not, it was seconds at least, right? It wasn't like loading it all into memory like the JSON file that you saw. But it still took like, I forget, like a good 5 seconds or something. And it's like, well, yeah, you're doing this every time. And then that wasn't even just the first time and caching it. It was every time the app started. They're like, yep, let's move that file over. So But that also had me thinking too, in both of these cases, like I know Android has some facility for downloading additional assets outside of the like App Store download. And in fact, if your app is big enough, you have to do that, or, get them from the internet some other way. But like if you use their built-in thing, at least it kind of does it for you. It waits for Wi-Fi, all those nice kind of little things. Have you ever used that?
I haven't had the need to yet. It's coming up. But again, those assets, like I tend to, if you have like a white label app, so something that runs for multiple companies, often what happens is if you're releasing under just a single banner, it will pull those assets. You either have them built in or it pulls those assets after logging in, right? So then you download them, you put them in the app storage, and you don't have to worry about that, right? You don't have to have these packaged assets.
But then those aren't
dependent on.
Like those aren't necessarily huge though either, right? Like I mean, I guess they could
Not
be.
Really. But they might have like a ton of images. They might have some resourcing in terms of like multilingual.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stupid stuff that can come in. But they're usually external, because if you have like 100 companies on your app, you don't want all their assets built into the app.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So there's ways you can solve it. So that's just one of them.
So
we have seen that one.
That's another good tale. What else we got?
Well, I saw this one on a bug the other day, and I have seen this before. I think when they started, and I'm going to blame James, Mr. Montemagno, for this one, because I saw him do a demonstration with the hosting, because I brought in hosting with Shiny. And that's when I think it started to become like this, where you guys had decided, okay, well, we're also going to do it in Maui, etc. So then the question started coming up, how do we load pages? Do pages participate in DI? Well, for me, they always have. And it's like people got on this thing where if I make the page singleton, it'll load faster. Okay. No.
I was going to say like,
well, kind of yes, but
well, if you resolve so here's my kind of new at DI still question.
Okay.
If I register a singleton, when does it get instantiated?
Right. Well, when it gets first hit, technically.
So when it first gets resolved, right?
Yeah.
So your first page load would still be slow.
Yeah.
And then subsequent ones, the idea would be that it's already made, so it's faster.
Sure, but it was already in the nav stack.
Yeah.
Right?
It's already in the nav stack, and it's already, potentially got changes in state and whatever you've done to it.
Well, and let's look at that for a second, because if you dissect that problem, so let's say, I pop and push a page that's a singleton onto the stack. If I entered a stuff in a form, and I nav back to that page now, what's that value? What's the value of that form? It's exactly how I left it.
Right.
So now I have to write routines to actually clear the state of the page. Whereas if I had
new up the view model again and rebind it, which is going to take time as well, right?
Well, usually, okay, so when I've seen this problem, it's been a case of both view model and page being singleton. Right. It's the same damn problem. If either end of those is marked singleton, it's all over. Like you could have the page be a singleton and your view model be a transient, but guess what? When you have a singleton and you pull in a scoped or a transient, you've just pinned that also as a singleton. Yep. Good job.
Yeah.
So just don't. You're not being clever, right? You just think about what you're doing and why. Because let's go to a web page for a second. When I hit a URL, is that a singleton? No,
not really.
If I close a tab or if I open another tab,
it's a new instance of the page.
It's a new instance. It's going to go react, generate all that stuff. And
you got to work to make it something that's shared between, page loads, right?
I'm not even sure you can, to be perfectly honest. If somebody knows how to, I guess PWAs, maybe you could do.
Yeah, there's things like. Yeah, there's ways you can do weird stuff like that.
Yeah, you really got to work at that one. You're right, to figure out how to do it. So why would we have our pages in a mobile app be any different? If they're transient is the case where the DI resolves it and doesn't track it, doesn't care, it'll never clean it out. It just kind of throws it off into space. I call it the can factory, right? It'll just keep printing those Coke cans till the end of the day, but it never takes them back and crushes them. Doesn't care.
Yeah.
Right. So it'll just keep printing out those cans, the transient. But if you're in scope of a MAUI app or whatever, where there is a nav stack, that transient is essentially acting as a singleton or even scoped, right? Because it's going to sit there in the stack. And if you've got like a main landing page, chances are that page may never go away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even the only time it might go away is if I've got a log in, log out scenario. But if I'm logged in and next time I visit the app, I would expect to still be logged in.
Yep.
It's going to be the same page. It's going to sit on the bottom the entire time. It's never going to go away. Same with tab pages, right? So even though it was a transient, it's still technically under the hood a singleton. The difference is that I don't have to clear state. So every time I go to like a form page, I'm going to resolve it. I'm going to navigate to it. And then it's going to be fresh state. It's a fresh batch. And then I actually have to do work to load it if I want to. But not this other way around, because then you have to clear it and then load. I don't know.
Well, you're just adding more complexity too, right? Like the chances of you doing something wrong there too just grow.
It just keeps getting worse. This you'd have like a reset method, and it would just keep getting bigger.
Yeah,
forget it.
Don't work so hard.
Yeah, don't do it. The best code is the code that you don't have to write. I mean, the less maintenance.
And speaking of DI stuff. Another one, and you touched on it, the one that you saw that had several hundred services or something like that. So like lots of services in and of themselves. Yeah, I mean, like
there's not really a huge cost to that, though. Believe it or not.
That's what I mean. Like, so like that might not be bad. Like if I say I have 300 services, that might be no worse than somebody who has 10 services, but they didn't write those services super thoughtfully. And by that, I mean, kind of the same idea of giving a good repro. Like, if you're going to have a repro that has like, here's all the services in my app, right? But then like, you don't want to share the logic of them because it's hard to separate that out from a repo.
Right.
It can be more hard, right? Or maybe.
No, you're not wrong.
So like stub them all out and it's like, here's my 100, services that I still have. But it doesn't really show, the problem that I'm seeing because like, okay, so digging into it, well, what do you do in those services, right?
Well, and that's interesting.
And what do you do in the constructors of them?
There we go. You hit the key point because a lot of people, let's not cover that one because I don't have it on here, but we're going to come to that one. Can we leave that demon out temporarily?
All right.
It's a crypt. Well, I don't know whatever note we're on, but part 2 of that.
Okay. What do you got then? Well, we put that one off.
Going back to the services, right? Like having 100 services, not really a problem. Now, if we go to your open source steward kind of thing, like what you should be doing, right? Maintainers don't want to look through 100 lines of code.
Yeah.
You have to start peeling back the layers yourself because at some point you realize where it got slow.
Well, I was going to say, sometimes that leads you to the problem and a solution, and then you don't even have to wait for somebody to help you, right?
Right, and as an engineer, you should be able to figure that out. Like, okay, well, this is where it happened. This is what we've done, and you can trivially go through those and go, when did it start? When did we start seeing this? Start taking some stuff out. You should be looking at PRs anyways to cover that, right? Like you can generally spot where things are going to be a problem, right? But let's go back to your other point about like there being too many services or not cleverly thought through. That maybe you've got too many services. And I could honestly say I have seen a lot. Like I've seen a main thread service. I've seen, the normal ones like a dialogue service, like, all that stuff. It makes sense. But people spend so much time writing technical services as opposed to business services, right? So Like I'll often see like a key value store of some sort, and then an authentication service of some sort, and then a navigation service. So that doesn't sound bad, but let's think of we're supposed to be separating concerns, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I logged in and I got an auth token. Well, does any of the other services really have to care about that? Because you're going to take that auth token, you're going to shove it in your key value secure storage, which you probably didn't need an abstraction on anyways. Maui already has it. But so you go ahead and you put it in there, and then now you have to have a constant because you need to be able to pull it out, right? And you need to make sure you're not using magic strings.
Yes.
So we do that. But then we got to figure out where those constants are every time. And now I have to go and add it everywhere. But if we separated the concerns properly, we didn't have a secure storage service and a B2C login service and we just had an auth service. And in that auth service, it said, look, I'm going to take a secure storage implementation and an API definition, and I'm going to call it, I'm not going to return I'm just going to return, the login was good or bad.
Yep.
And then I'm going to store the access token internally because I'm going to have services that use it, but you don't need to see that in the front, and you don't even need to know how I stored it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
you don't
all
care.
of a
That's
sudden
implementation.
all of a sudden I've reduced it, which means it's easier for my devs to work with, right? So any devs that are working with my service go, oh, neat. All I just I passed it an email and a password, and it said yep or nope, and it's dealing with all that stuff.
Well,
Great.
that's kind of like, I don't know how to. Yeah, I think you've summarized the thought or feeling that I often have when trying to figure out how to design these things, which is like it. How can you kind of make it, even if it's just for yourself? How do you make it kind of feel like enjoyable or magic or pleasant to consume it, right? And so like what you're saying is just that I get my instance of this service, and I ask for login, or I say go fetch me something, and it deals with all of that stuff behind the scenes, right? Like
Right.
you're aiming for that kind of like, oh, this is really nice feeling, right, when you use it. Like that's like the goal. Like that's, I think, the thing to always keep in mind, which is kind of funny. I mean, it's gonna sound cheesy, but I always really liked this kind of mantra that Xamarin had, which was like delight developers.
Yep.
And that's something that's stuck with me ever since, because I think it actually is a really concise, description of that goal, right? Which is just like, make it nice.
I don't want to know how the implementation, because the implementation is the details, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes
so, like,
it can be very difficult.
For something like this, like one option, depending on what you're doing. Like if you're just building a MAUI app, then sure, yeah, why even have a service for secure storage or whatever, because it just use the APIs that are there. I mean, like there's cases like I have an abstraction in Pool Math because I do want to use the same kind of layer on what Blazor, WASM, and MAUI, and so it's like, well, the MAUI one doesn't work there, so I have to do something. Now you could argue I could still do that all in that one service and not have a separate thing that deals with that. But I think there's reasonable separation of concerns there. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, don't make it like, don't make the secure storage thing the thing that other services then use to get the token to then figure out how to make the request, right? Like
just make it smart, hide it.
Yeah.
Right. Because there are cases where you're going to want to have an abstraction. So secure storage abstraction does make sense because you need to go cross-platform.
Yeah,
that's why we do it. It's not because we need a secure storage, because we could just do an implementation of it, right? We're never going to plug it out. It's all going to work the same.
Yeah.
But in this case, like if you look at the secure storage, it's nice. It's really nice because I put a key in, I get a key out. And if you look at the implementations, okay, the iOS one is really just works. It's nice.
Yeah.
Mostly. But you look at the Android one and you're like, oh boy. Right? So you don't want to know that. That's what the delighting the developer part is, because it's simple. Right?
Yeah.
But I don't need to over abstract it. Which comes to the next point.
Okay.
And this is the last point on this loading a massive ton of services. The PR or the issues I hate getting these. If you send them to me, don't expect me to be nice, because like, dude, I don't want to figure out your spaghetti. if you're going to take in a third-party dependency, don't abstract the abstraction. And if you're going to submit a repo, don't give me your abstract of an abstraction, right?
Yeah.
So I tend to get these in Shiny, usually around Bluetooth, right? Because people don't like observables. I don't care. There is async versions you can use, but don't try and wrap it to make everything void. I've seen that, believe it or not.
Ooh.
Just because you don't like working with async or you don't like working with observables, that's not my problem. Don't use it. Maybe this library is not appropriate for you.
Yeah,
and if you don't like that answer,
I just don't like this part about it.
Well, and you're trying to abstract me out in case you need to go to another plugin.
That's right.
Right? Somebody else's code. But then you end up losing the common denominator of it, right? So, and you think you're saving yourself some code, you're actually trying to write, you're going to end up writing more and you're going to end up having more bugs. Stop it. Either take the dependency or don't, right? You could say, okay, well, what if Shiny disappears tomorrow? Well, if you had stuck to the business services. So when I write something that's going to work with a particular device. So let's say, I don't know, I have a rock. It's got my daughter's name on it. I have a rock. I want to scan for this rock, right? So how do I scan for the rock? I have to know that I'm looking for a particular type of rock. It's called a service UID, right?
Yeah. I want a rock.
Yeah. So, oh, wow. Good. Wow.
Come on.
All right. I'm going to have to let that go. I'm almost going to lose my train of thought. So I scan for the rock and now I want to connect to the rock and I don't know how the rock works, right? I don't want to have to send bytes to it. Just translate all of that gibberish and all those bytes because .NET devs don't like to work with bytes. I don't know why. Do all that stuff for me. I just want to send it an int or an enum or, all those things. I just want to send that stuff and not worry about how it did it. Did you serialize it? Did you send it with, I don't know, in 20 bytes? Did you have to stream it? Who cares? Just async. Here's an enum. Figure it out. So I can hide all that stuff and still be abstracting the abstraction, right? So if I needed to swap that out for a different Bluetooth library, because I stuck to a business service, my business is the rock.
Right. That's the abstraction, right?
Exactly. Well, and now I can mock all that and not worry.
This almost kind of like gets into the classic territory of, I think it's well known enough, right? Like everyone jokes about creating an abstraction over your data layer or your database, right? And it's like, for every project that you ever do that for, how many times have you actually gone back and changed out the database in the back end? And, for the time,
for the
times,
server, yes,
maybe. And for the times you have, like, okay, what was it more, did you save more time by abstracting every project you've ever written out from the database layer? Or could you have just gone and swapped the one or two that you changed out, right? Like,
right.
It adds a little bit of a old kind of thing now, right? With like, there's layers now that are kind of standard
framework.
Yeah.
Do you really need a repository?
Exactly.
Some would argue the purists that you want to have dependency injection and testability, which is not wrong, but there's different ways to achieve that nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And if entity framework is not fast, you can still, if you've abstracted or mediated your problem, mediation's a good way to deal with it. You can put that one particular query on a stored procedure.
Yeah.
Now that stored procedure probably going to be pretty custom to the platform or the database you're using, but so be it, right? That's how you get out of it.
Yeah.
So you're right. Why try so hard to do it? I mean, Microsoft has done it. Any framework's great. There's stuff like Dapper and all that.
Yeah,
cool
but
stuff.
that's even a whole other thing than like, I feel like back in the day, and I know I did this too with projects where I'm like, I might want to allow people to use whatever database they want, and I'm the only user that ever used the thing anyway, so who cares?
Well, we live and we learn of what's too complicated.
It's kind of like the optimization rules, right? Like, first rule, don't.
Yeah, well, that's always the first question you ask. Do you have a performance problem? And 9 out of 10 times that answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
Well, then why are you solving for it? You're just going to create the problem that you were trying to fight in the first place. Just chill out.
Yeah.
Don't. Follow John's advice. Don't. If there was a shirt you could get that said,
Yeah.
red says no or don't.
Yeah. Should I don't?
Don't. So going back to your constructor one, because we promised we'd get that one.
Yeah. I'm waiting.
Let's hear. Do you have a story there, or are you just
not
wondering?
specifics, but like, I mean, there's a case that I looked at, I know, where kind of like I said, like person's trying to create a repro, give them all the credit for doing the work to get us something, but then at the end of it, it's like, well, it doesn't really repro that quite, like, yes, you can kind of see it, the difference, but it's not as pronounced as in the real app. And it's like, yeah, all these services are empty. So, and I don't know the case, if I never got to the point of hearing, did you find something, but like, just one of the suggestions is like, go look at what your services are actually doing. And maybe you think perfectly well, nothing nefarious, but who knows, like maybe somebody threw you've got a constructor and maybe it does a connection to a database or some backend in the like, right? Like all it takes is one. Yeah. All it takes is like one, not well-placed decision or line of code.
Constructor.
And if you're working on a big team, like maybe you've got a developer that's more junior and didn't realize any better. And so now you're in this world of like stuff taking longer. And when you're talking about, app startup or something, and the difference of like 1 second, that's all it takes, right?
Yep.
So like there's different areas, it's really just a case of like, if you're really for startup performance, like go look at the hot path of what you're doing. And like you're saying, to kind of make that repro, you're going to have to peel back layers and kind of watch what's going on anyway. So at that point, you're probably going to find the answer you're looking for in your own code.
Because if you send that to a maintainer, first of all, if that maintainer does that for free, they don't have time to go through it, man. You give them the minimal viable product to repro that issue, so that they can get it done, and chances are they will fix it for you. Give them a good MVP.
Yeah,
give them a good issue.
And we're in a bit different of a position because we're maintainers of a repo, but we have we have customers who are
cycles.
Well, it's cycles. I just mean like we want to help make people successful with their apps and stuff, but yeah, you still have to go do that work. And one of the other things, like thinking about this too, that's related, I know I've seen in other issues too, is as people are migrating more from Xamarin Forms to MAUI, there's often like an apples to apple, or seemingly apples to apples comparison, right? It's like, in Xamarin Forms, this thing worked like this. In MAUI, it's slower, or it doesn't work the same, or we're having problems with it. And anytime it's really around performance too, it's like there's so many differences between the old mono, and we've talked on previous episodes about the different runtimes, right? Like there's there's all mono, but there's 2 different mono runtimes, and they're not equal.
Well, it's changed a lot. It's even changed from Net 6 to Net 8. Think about it.
And it's not necessarily like the low level runtime details themselves, although those have changed too. Part of the change has been like the runtime library layer, right? And the implementation of things is more common now to the rest of .NET in the new mono runtime. And so changes there can have a dramatic impact depending on, what your code is doing on mobile, how it gets compiled, to AOT or just in time. Like there's all these factors, right? So the unfortunate reality, and what kind of, this is my tale from the Crypt of like, I can't tell you why your app is 500 milliseconds slower on MAUI than it was on Forms when you're telling me everything is all the same between the two, right? there's too many variables. And in most cases, or a lot of cases, a lot of the code is faster on MAUI, but when you hit a case that isn't, you got to kind of dig into it and look at your own code and figure out, what's on your hot path.
Well,
and so there's no easy fix.
People submitting bugs with like dependency injection and stuff to MAUI, and then complaining that it was faster in Xamarin. It's like, you guys do UI, you do rendering, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's more of a runtime question, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, send it to the appropriate team.
Yeah. Well, and then there's like variants of that too, where it's like, some third, again, like you're talking about bringing your dependencies over, right? Or it's like, well, this, DI implementation is way slower on MAUI than it was on Forms. And like, okay, we don't build that thing. Like, I don't know what they're doing in it. Like,
And it's complicated.
Use the built-in one and find the differences, and then we can kind of talk about what we can figure out and why it might be slower. But again, even there, it's usually kind of like a case of stuff's different enough between old mono and new mono that it's you're not gonna go like have this aha moment where like that's the thing that made it slower, right? Like it's just not, that's not how it works.
But it's also not your area of expertise either. So how the heck are you gonna even know?
Yeah.
Right. That's don't be dumb about it. Just figure out where your issue belongs.
Yeah. So, figure out what you're doing in your services when you register them all too.
Well, and I've got some constructor ones. I've seen some really good stuff there. It's called a constructor for a reason. You're supposed to assemble your object. You're not supposed to do logic.
Right.
You're just supposed to set things up. I have seen so many things get instantiated, thread locked, you name it. Don't do logic in the constructors.
Yeah.
Just don't. Wire things up. That's what it's for.
Oh, and especially like, no async calls and stuff too, right? Oh, there's a reason why you can't put the async on a constructor.
Right, because it's not going to wait. But it's funny you say that, John. I have indeed seen async calls. Now, no awaits like a continue with or it's a fire and forget.
Yeah.
But that's
fire and forget this critical thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, because, and you know why I see it? And this is kind of like, it's kind of because shell, it's kind of because they don't understand view models, etc. That issue aside, what made you think that running an async fire and forget in a constructor was a good idea? And the reason they did it is because they didn't know how to get lifecycle to their view model. So they were like, what's on appearing? Dude, you have to wire it through. It's just you have to, if you want to work in a view model, you need lifecycle, right? Because it's tied to the page. Do not call an async method in the constructor. Stop it. Just stop. If you're doing synchronous, it's even worse. Then you're filing an issue saying it's slow. And John's going, well, dude, you're doing a synchronous database connection in your constructor, which, by the way, you can do.
Yeah.
Why? I don't really know.
Shouldn't. Yeah.
But I've seen some strange stuff. And just don't construct. It's not a logic. It's not a logictor. It's a constructor.
Well, and
that was pretty bad.
Yeah, that was worse than the one, whatever the bad joke I just said was. That one. That was good.
I didn't forget yet.
Quite like that one. See, it was so good you didn't forget. So like the other part of that is you might, okay, fine, maybe you're not doing anything in your constructor. But that doesn't, like in this case where like I have no insight into what's this thing that's slowing their app down here, right? But like what else is on the hot path, right? Like as you're resolving these services, as you're like doing things and maybe a page on appearing, like are you making sure that the stuff you're doing there is reasonable too, right? Like that's another thing. It's like all, like you're saying before, like have a page that loads fast and do the things you need to do on the background or whatever.
You can set a nice little spinner there.
Yeah.
You can launch it at a task so that it doesn't lock up your UI, and you can be like, yeah, we're waiting for that 300 meg file to load. It's still going.
Yeah.
Heck, you can even count the amount of memory it's using while you're there. Just actively doing. We're using now 800 megs for your 300 meg file.
And then you can like show the kind of percentage likelihood of the app crashing while it's doing that.
Yeah, you could. You probably could.
As the memory goes up, and maybe you can see like available, and then you can be like, I don't know, guys, we might not make it.
We're gonna hit the end.
Yeah.
All right. What else have you seen? I know I've picked on this point before.
I think I see your favorite one. I mean,
observable collections.
Yeah, I've grown to be unfond of it as well.
Well, I still think people don't understand, and I know we've covered this probably a ton because I hate them. Sorry, I don't hate it. It's like people use it for everything, and you don't need it for 95% of your use cases.
Yeah, it's a very specialized type that you should use in a very specialized way.
And what's worse is that in order to make observable collections work, every control has to obey them, right? So it has to go, are you a normal enumerable? Okay, you are, bind. Are you an observable collection? Okay, let's hook all those events.
Yep.
And we'll have to deallocate them at some point too.
Right. Yeah, there's the other part.
And I will start watching remove, and I'll make sure I get it to the index. And what about the scroll position and adding? Where does that go? Does it get appended? Does it get inserted? How the hell do you even do an insert? You have to update that logic.
Well, so here's the problem is that, like, I think observable collection has a number of change types, right, in the event.
Yep. Add, remove.
But like, like you're saying, like everything
update.
that's gonna use and accept an observable collection has to understand all of those as well if it's gonna do them properly. And I think what often people do, and myself included, like so for virtual list view, I made a observable collection adapter, right? Because somebody's gonna ask for it, right?
Yep. Fair.
Actually, I even used it myself one time. I forget why.
There are places for it though.
There's places for it, but like, in that, it's like, I'm not going to do all the work to implement all of the different like change types. And so like, it's just going to, no matter what the change type is, I'm just going to reset the underlying, native adapter because it's going to figure it out.
Oh, and that's a good segue, because when are you going to, if you're going to see a performance problem, this is where you're going to see it. Now, I don't know why this has never been solved in the BCL, to be honest, with why there isn't an add range. I think it's really because of the eventing. Sorry, go ahead.
That's an interesting one. There isn't necessarily a great reason why that doesn't exist. The reason mostly now, I mean, one, it's something that people can work around and figure out. So it's not like a top priority for the team that would be responsible for that to do that work, given the other priorities that they have, right? Like all of the teams in Microsoft, like everyone loves to think like, oh, it's this massive company and there's these huge teams. It's like, no, that's not how it works. And like, even if there were bigger teams, it doesn't necessarily make like more, you can't just throw more people at every problem and expect it to move faster or better, right? Like there's obviously a exponential curve of some kind of, value to resources and all that. Right. So I know I've spoken with somebody on that team in the past, and actually they brought it up. They're like, hey, we always see there's one massive issue that talks about it, and there's some level of appetite to add that kind of functionality into the BCL. One of the main problems is like there's such a strong set of opinions that don't concur on how to do it, and so it's like it's one of those like you're gonna piss off 70% of people no matter what decision you make. So it's like,
don't make any decision.
Right.
So I mean, basically what ends up happening here, to go to the problem, is for apps that have a binding to an observable collection, we'll talk about why I don't use an observable collection in a second. But for those that do have the binding, if you're doing a loop because you're going to get data from, say, a service, and you're like, oh, there's no add range, you're going to start for eaching it. Well, the problem is every time you call add, it triggers the notification change event, right, and redraws that UI. And then if you brought in 300 items, even if those items are virtualized, right, it still has to do a redraw. It doesn't know any better. It doesn't care.
Well, and it's going to redraw.
That's an optimization you could make, I guess.
Well, it's going to redraw at least so if you think about how, I mean, collection view, but like I'll use my virtual list view because I have more intimate understanding with how all the bits fit together. If you look at how that's done, like, okay, in my adapter, it's only going to tell the platform adapter to invalidate itself. And the platform adapter is going to look and say, okay, I can show 8 items on the screen right now. Here, that's the index I'm at scroll wise. Probably worst case, it's going to have to like figure out where it is and maybe draw like, all of those 8 items again or something, right?
Yep.
So it's not going to do it for everything. However, still doing that like 300 times isn't great compared to doing it one time for no benefit, right? Like if you're drawing the same 8 items 300 times, that's going to be slower than one time, I think.
True. Yeah, it's pretty good assumption.
Yeah.
If you do something
I think
more
the logic
times,
works out.
it's going to be slow.
Yeah.
But people keep doing this, and I keep seeing the same issues, and it's like, dude, you need to understand what you're doing.
Well, and so adding items to that collection like that, so going back to so it's the notify collection changed event args.
Yep.
And in theory, if you add a new item, it should tell you that it, I think there's an add or a replace. An enum
that says, here's the event that took place.
Yeah. So and then there's here's the new items that were added, right? So it gives you a proper view of kind of the change set. Mm-hmm. However, almost nobody actually uses that. And like I said, everybody just kind of I'm just going to go reset because that's the easiest thing to do.
And that's the thing, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Right. When we think about an update operation, like a replace, it doesn't really, even in MAUI, it's got to go, okay, there's the index. It's there. I'm just going to say, look, this element changed. I'm going to rebind that control if it's invisible, right? It's complicated. It's not.
Because how does it know unless you tell the collection with the thing that, here's what I'm replacing, right? Otherwise it's not going to know.
So it's really complicated to do. And I don't think people really understand that.
Yeah.
Now, the question usually comes up, well, I thought that's the only way I could bind a collection. Do you know how many times I've heard that from people that have used Xamarin and WPF for years, that's how they think they bind lists? I'm like, dude, do you understand? Every single item is based on notify property changed, which is nothing more than a string property of the property that changed, including lists. So, I mean, I tend to see a lot of people use observable collections. You could have the argument that yes, it's easier, but I often see people do a clear, redraw number one, and then the for each add or add range if they have an add range. So they now just they went through all that operation. Why didn't you just say, load API, transform it any way you need to do, stick it on list, notify property change list, re-render list.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's still memory efficient.
That's not any more code.
It's actually technically faster. One redraw.
Yep.
Not the clear, redraw one, and the add range, giving benefit of the doubt, draw two.
Right.
So observable collections were made for data in motion. So what I mean by that is I might have multiple threads. So when I do a Bluetooth scan, I have this thing that returns an observable collection. I call it a managed scan because people don't understand it. And it's also, they have trouble thread locking or making it thread safe, this collection. So I'm hitting it with updates and new devices that I find. I'm hitting it with updates of those devices. And then if I don't hear from that device, because it's a scan, right? You can't tell when something's at a range. You just don't hear it anymore. So if it's been 10 seconds since I've heard it, right, I remove it, right? I can kick it off the list. So I got threads blasting at it. And I can thread safety that and lock it so that collection doesn't implode, because you can't have two things touching a collection at the same time. That's bad. So, but because I'm constantly adding, removing, updating, that data is in motion. So that's a good place to use it. But for clear and add range, don't stop. Just use a list, man. Please.
Yeah.
Please. It would make your life so much easier. It really would.
One area. So I've had kind of a wish for a while that we would have Roslyn analyzer support in XAML. And I think it's on, the radar of that team anyway. I don't know if there's any plans or, it's ever going to actually happen. But these are the
too many ways you can do it.
Well, no, but just to be able to write some analyzers for some of these scenarios, right? Where something you could do this one probably more in C#, I guess, because it's not. But even just to say hey, we see, you're binding an observable collection type. Can we do something to just make sure that you understand what you're doing here?
We just saw a single add. Oh, and we saw a clear and then an add range. Not that the add range is there, so you'd have to watch for it.
But yeah, I guess we could do the C# one, and that would be helpful probably. Right?
Yeah,
just to be model. Just even to look for okay, so you're doing anytime you're touching add on an observable collection, we'd want to go and look at, is that inside of some kind of iteration?
It'd be tough to find, but yeah, I see where you're going.
I don't know. I don't know if it'd be that bad.
Well, because people tend to put it off in different methods, right? They might have like a thing that's binding, or appending to the collection, so the collection's getting passed around, and
yeah, maybe.
I think it's a bit. I think
you might be able to detect the cases where somebody does, like you said, like the clear, and then is like add, right?
Yeah, find the add, look at it as observable collection. Go, did you mean to do add?
Yeah,
you may want to inherit the observable collection and add an add range. Just thinking,
or replace with the list.
Yeah, or replace with the list.
Yeah. So that one will forever be, I think, something that we see and have to cringe a little bit at.
Well, again, you don't need an observable collection. You just need a list. Just do a list. Don't make it hard on yourself.
All right. Are there any other big egregious offenses that we've seen that we're missing? I'm sure there are.
Well, I think this could be like Tales from the Crypt, the first episode of it.
Yeah.
And probably
Season
have
1.
more of these in the future, because, I mean, this is just a small portion. I've seen things that make your eyes bleed.
And to be fair, I mean, I'm sure I've done some of these things too.
Well, you don't get better without doing the mistakes, right? So at some point you have to invent, and you have to go down the path. I think really how it is nowadays is that when we screwed up when we were kids, there was no. You didn't go out to Stack Over. There was no Stack Overflow. You pick up a book. You might find an online form that would tell you you're being stupid.
Yeah.
But for most of the part, we just had to figure it out. And this generation seems to have.
When there wasn't as much of a record of our stupidity following us around forever either. It's kind of like the whole, pictures and phones and stuff for kids these days. If you use an observable collection RON once, that's going to be on the internet forever.
Well, I did take a screenshot of you saying you had bought into DI, so I still have that forever.
That's right.
Forever.
See? And if if you're interviewing for a new job and some employers looking at your profiles and your commit history, and they see that, you just don't do it because you don't want them to have to see that.
There you go.
All right. Do we have a plugin package or product?
Well, I did say during the episode source generator kit.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
So that was a nice little
look at that.
It's not out on NuGet. So, and also doing NuGets with source generators is hard. Let's not even go down the reasons for why. Just trust me, taking a NuGet package inside of a source generator, not the easiest thing in the world. So I think that's why this isn't on NuGet. I don't know. But I copied the code, I put it in my source generator. It's doing mostly what I needed to do right now. So definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, it looks cool. I was just kind of searching it right now. And yeah, there's one that I thought would be great to have, which is specifically find all classes which implement specific interface.
Yep. Or an abstraction. It's got a base class.
Yeah.
So it's got a bunch of little scans, and it does cool. Because the syntax receiver is kind of like this big beastly class that you need to override everything.
Yep.
Like you look at it and you're like, okay, what do I need to override? Well, it depends on what you're doing. It depends.
Yeah, no, this is really cool. I think I'm going to have to find a way to use this.
Somehow. Really, it's what makes using the syntax generators, the syntax receivers, is what makes. I think that's how the incremental generator technically works under the hood.
I was going to say, does this support the incremental stuff too?
No.
Okay.
Syntax receivers are a pure source generator thing. The incremental generators, I don't know if the intent, I think, was to make it faster, but it certainly did not make source generators any easier at all.
No, it didn't make them easier for sure. I know we forever ago when they introduced them had to switch like the XAML code behind generator to use incremental.
Oh,
I didn't do that, thankfully. That was Stefan figuring that out, but that was not an easy switch to make either.
There would have been a lot of 4-letter words probably in that work. It's not hard. It's not easy. once you figure it out, you know what? I still find, because I've written a number of them now, I still can't remember how to do it. Every time I go in, I was like, what did I do? How did I do this? Like they're not easy. So I get why people aren't writing them necessarily, but really it's worth looking. If you can find packages like this, it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's cool. Really love that. Looks like it hasn't been updated in a while. Maybe somebody will find inspiration.
Because it doesn't support the incremental generator.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, maybe somebody will see how cool this is and make an incremental supported version of it.
Like I said, I'm pretty sure this is what it's doing under the hood, because it's the syntax receivers are nice and fast, right?
Yeah.
So it only notifies it when one of those things changes, which is that's cool.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it's doing. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks neat. And yeah, this would be pretty easy to pick up and wire in to do the thing that we talked about, right? To like generate all the registrations. So
I'm already
neat.
doing it for one of my projects right now. I'm trying this out right now, but I'll save that shameless plug package for another time. It's not done yet. It's in preview.
Okay. Well, and we'll probably do another episode at some point on it too, right?
I'm excited for it. The mediator. Mediator for apps.
Cool.
Future episode.
I think that'll do it for today, for this first episode of Tales from the Crypt. So
leave them in the crypt.
If you're not, if we didn't touch on something that you've done and you're still not too upset with us, if you are too upset with us, please don't listen to this next part. If we called you out and you've done the thing that you shouldn't have done, and like I've done in the past, but I'm okay now. I got over it. Don't listen to this. But if you haven't, and you're happy to learn about the things that you shouldn't do, and you're not too upset about it, we're looking for those 5-star reviews. But if it's going to be a 1-star, just it's not worth your time.
You know what?
Honestly,
the next episode will be stupid things I can remember doing. I have taken down production a couple times because of stupid things I've done. So we'll save that. Yeah, we'll save that. But I don't mind being the butt of the joke.
Well, I don't either, but I have a bad memory, so I've done so many dumb things that I wouldn't be able to remember half of them.
Oh, they never leave me.
I'll have to try.
They're part of my soul.
All right, yeah. So 5-star reviews only, and if you can do that, that would be great. I don't even know if we have had any for all my begging and pleading. So please, somebody hear me.
Well, we're getting the audience. There's a lot of you out there, so
yeah. There's a bunch. So that means that you kind of owe it to yourself to help us.
Well, you owe it to us.
Well, I was trying
hit the damn button.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Otherwise, I'll find a reason to put you on Tales of the Crypt. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So there you go. Gonemobile.io is the website. You can find all the links to all the things. I sent you some. We had some feedback the other day again. Do you remember what it was? I have to find it again.
I don't. We'll find it. Maybe we can save that for the episode
quick now.
Okay.
Because we're already here.
Because I wanted the shameless plug for it. It's going to be.
I found it.
Okay.
So this one was from Matthew. I'm not going to dox anyone here. So I'll keep last names and everything private just in case. And actually Matthew looks like a fellow Canadian, if that's not too revealing, based on the .ca email address that I see. Matthew says that they rather enjoyed the episode on app architecture. Last few episodes have been excellent. So thanks. Hey, hopefully you've got the 1-star review, or not 1-star, the 5-star review.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. So it sounds like Matthew would like to hear more about the mediator pattern as he's using it in his apps, at least to some extent too. So I think you got one fan for the mediator pattern and plugin. So
it's been out for 4 days. It's already at 500 downloads, so I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Is it public? Is it like the repo? Okay,
there's an alpha out there, but I'm almost ready to publish that puppy out. Almost.
So maybe we can put a link up too, so that Matthew can find it as well.
All right, we can do that, but I think we got to do an episode, maybe app architecture too, and we'll put that guy
definitely
because I'm going to convert John. Couldn't get him on RX.
Well, I like the pattern. I like where it's going. I have to find the time and need to put it to swap in.
John already messaged me, if you put RX in it, I hate you or something.
Then I'm putting you on the next episode of Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah, he did. It was quite violent the way he said it too, just for the record.
That's right.
He's not a complete nice guy like you might think.
Sorry.
That's all right. I can live with it.
All right, Al. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time on Gone Mobile.
Bye.